Welcome to the Build on Beauty podcast, where beauty is born skin deep. Now, here's your host, author, speaker, entrepreneur, Cornell Jermaine.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very special guest. She is a marketing executive, empowerment speaker, life strategist, and an author. Please help me welcome Sheri Riley. Sheri, how are you today?
I am wonderful, Cornell. How are you doing?
Doing really good. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to get into some of your background first as an executive. You worked with LaFace Records, worked very closely with R&B singer Usher. Give us some insight into your background in the music and marketing business.
Yes, well, I am from a small town in Kentucky, but I always knew that I should say as a teenager, probably around 14, 15, I knew I wanted to work in the entertainment industry. But what was so unique about that at the time is this was, I'm going to date myself, pre-computers, pre-iPhones, pre-Google, pre-internet. And so there wasn't a whole lot of information about the music industry. I had never been to Atlanta, but I knew that's where I wanted to live, and I knew that I wanted to work in that industry. So coming from a small town in Kentucky, all I had was a dream. I didn't have connections. I didn't have information. But all through college, I focused on doing any and everything I could to connect myself to this industry, this music industry. And so I read Billboard, I read Variety, I read all the trade magazines, and I really began to educate myself. But, whole lot of work, whole lot of calls, whole lot of no's. And fast forward, I got my opportunity. I met Gerald Levert, and I was able to secure a position with his company, and that led to an opportunity at LaFace Records. And so, about 10 years later, this small town girl is now living her dream, and I'm the marketing director at LaFace Records, responsible for Toni Braxton, TLC, Usher, the 1996 Centennial Olympic album, Donnell Jones. And I love my artists. I loved who I worked with. I loved my team. And I loved marketing. I loved creating something from nothing and helping the world not only discover it, but then say, hey, I'm going to put my money down and buy it. And that's what I got the pleasure to do with, albums, Usher and the Crazy Sexy Cool album, TLC, that went on to sell 10 million copies. So that's the journey to get into the music industry, and my second stop, LaFace Records.
Now, you have a unique story with R&B superstar Usher. Share with us your experience with him and how it transitioned you to some of the work that you do now.
Yes, well, again, I was this small town girl with a dream. And, being from the Midwest, all I knew was integrity. You work hard, stay true to your word. And so when I got to LaFace, I was so green. I was still very young. I was in my mid-20s, early 20s. And so I didn't know the whole, industry stuff. And so here was this kid, who was 15, about to turn 16, and he had big dreams. I mean, everything Usher is doing now, he was talking about when he was 14, 15, 16. And so what really bonded us was this underdog kind of reality. He was an underdog. When I got to the label, he was, his voice was changing, and they were trying to really figure out his lane because he had this massive charisma that, men and women really bought into, but he was still a kid. And so we were trying to find his lane, his musical voice. And so there was a lot of challenges, especially when you had these huge records like Toni Braxton and TLC that were just, dominating the attention of the company. And so me and him really bonded in the sense of, all I knew is this was someone's son. This was someone who had a dream, and it was my dream that got me to this point. And so we had, this opportunity to really go out and create some marketing plans and strategies that because no one was really paying attention, we were able to just kind of go out and was able to create great campaigns with the NBA. We did a major stay-in-school program with them, with this unknown artist, which he was one of the first to do that. And so it really allowed us to form a bond. But what I've always said to him and what I've always said to other people is I was always more concerned with who he became as a man than what we created for him as a brand. I felt like even before I really knew what exponential living was, I always felt like that we didn't have to eliminate who you become as a person as we build who you are as a brand and as a marketing entity. I always believed that those two could work hand in hand. And really, it wasn't a conscious reality for me. It was just really who I am. And so now, looking back, 20 years later, that really was the beginning of exponential living and how the realities of what we do and who we are fully integrated. They're not two separate entities.
So you leave LaFace and you go in to your own thing, and you start your work as a life strategist. Tell us, because that's a new term we're hearing now, tell us exactly what that work entails.
Okay. Well, actually, when I left LaFace, I started another business, Glue, which did strategic consulting for 17 years. I closed that 3 years ago, and about 5 years ago is when I moved into serving as an empowerment speaker, life strategist, and author. And, initially I was calling myself a personal development coach because that's really the core of what I focus in. Your personal development fuels your professional growth. But what I realized, and actually Marshawn Daniels, it was a call her and I was having, and she asked me something. She said, Sheri, I know your background and I know what you've done marketing-wise. But I don't really see a lot of that in your communication. And, so we just kept talking and talking. But what I really understood finally about kind of what I bring, what I've always done, is I really do serve as a life strategist. And what that is, Cornell, is I really have a 360-degree approach with my clients. As a personal development coach, that's a component of what I do. As a marketing executive back in the day, as of 3 years ago, that was a component of what I've done. But with my clients, whether they hired me to do their marketing or currently, whether they hire me to help them with their personal development and professional development, we always look at the totality of who they are. And what I'm really keen at, really what my sweet spot is how do we really look at your life? How do we look at where you are, and how do we look at where you want to be? And what are all the pieces that we need to make sure you get in place on that journey? And it really is about the strategy of your life and then how you then implement those things that you need to accomplish. And so that's why I say life strategist, because it really is a 360-degree approach to really helping people in their personal and their professional growth and development.
So speaking of the 360-degree approach, let's talk about the book that you just penned, Exponential Living, how to stop focusing so much on 100%, I'm paraphrasing, of what you do, and help me with that phrase. It's 100% versus the 10%.
Stop spending 100% of your time on 10% of who you are.
Okay.
Yes.
Now give us the ideology behind that, because that's very catchy and it's so needed in this day. What's the idea behind that?
Yeah, so I was there was a young lady that I mentored, and this was about 16 years ago. And, I mentored her, still mentor her, and she had her dream job. She was a marketing executive at LaFace, at Cornell Records, which was Outkast's company. She was, an industry executive. She was respected. Outkast at the time was the biggest. They had just won the Grammy for Best Album of the Year. They were the biggest act in the world. And so she really had this great career that she'd wanted for so long. And so, one day I was in her office and we were talking, and, she was like, Sheri, she was talking. Everything was fine, but I could just tell, because I know her, that something was off. And so I asked her, well, are you still singing in the choir? And she was like, no, I haven't done that in a while, probably about a year or so. And I said, oh, well, do you have a pet now? You've got a dog? And she's like, no. And I knew she'd grown up with dogs. I knew she loved dogs. I was like, well, when's the last time you went home? I knew she, very close to her family. She's like, oh, my God, I haven't been home in so long. And so I literally said to her, I said, well, how do you think you're going to get 100% of your fulfillment if you're only living in 10% of who you are? And literally both of us knew at that moment I had hit something, because it was like a ton of bricks. Like, it changed the whole dynamic of her life. And I knew in that moment. But what really hit me, Cornell, is, when I said to her, stop spending 100% of your time on 10% of who you are, how can you find 100% of your fulfillment in that small, narrow 10%? But what really drove me when I made that statement was really uncovering and discovering the how, right? It's a catchy phrase, but how do you do that? How do you stop spending 100% of your time on 10% of who you are? And that's what my journey has been. That is this book is the combination of the how. How do you stop spending? And what I've discovered is these 9 principles serve as the how. These 9 principles of exponential living that I wrote about in my book, they are the how to live in that 100% of who you are.
Now, I heard you mention 3 key areas that I believe are essential to developing this exponential life. And you mentioned peace, clarity, and courage. Can you explain each one of those and how they impact this exponential living?
Yes. I have found, Cornell, that every challenging experience we have in our life, there's always a simple answer. And one of the hardest parts of living is, we have these complex issues, and so we try to deal with it in a complex way. And what I've discovered is simply when we pursue peace, meaning when we understand that our inner peace, that we can choose to be calm in any and all situations, regardless of our external circumstances, that when we pursue that peace, that's what allows us to get into a place of clarity. In the midst of the craziness, in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the challenges, when we can stay rooted in our peace, it allows us to get very focused in, get the clarity that we need. And when you have peace and clarity, that empowers you to live courageously. And why the 3 of them are so important, the peace, the clarity, and the courage, is because the peace and the clarity will give you the answers, but it takes courage to actually make the change. It takes courage to actually go after your dream. It takes courage to not get stuck in the process. And so a lot of times we'll get the revelation, but we won't move. Or we'll move with no clarity or wisdom. And so, or we'll move with clarity, but we're frantic and we lose friends and family along the way. So it really is the marriage of those 3, peace, clarity, and courage, that allows us to truly live exponentially.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I just want our listeners to hear this, is exponential living is not just about professional development and becoming this big executive. It's about having a whole life that exemplifies what you desire and what you want. Am I correct?
It is. It is personal and professional. It's the whole package. And really broadening the definition of success. So many of us narrow our definition of success down to, a title or how many zeros and commas we have in our bank account. And so we really miss out on success being exercise, getting 8 hours of sleep, a good marriage, quality relationships with your family, serving in your community, having a hobby, all those things should be a part of our definition of success. instead of this very narrow definition that robs us daily of our peace and our joy.
Now, there are so many chapters in the book that help our readers, but there's one in specific that I want to just get your insight on, and it's stop working and start maximizing. Can you explain exactly what that means?
Yes. Oh my gosh, if I can do it in 30 seconds or less, because that is one of the most powerful principles. And what it means is so many of us put our heads down and we work hard. So many of us are busy getting a lot of stuff done, right? So many of us have these massive to-do lists that we every day have a sense of accomplishment sometimes because we're knocking things off, right? But many of us, even the busiest of us, if we really stop and I said, are you productive? Like, are you actually moving forward or are you just moving? And many, many times we're just moving. We're not productive, or we're not moving forward, or we don't really have a clear understanding of where we're going. We just know we're supposed to, quote unquote, make money, right? And so I was that person. I mean, L.A. Reid one day literally was standing at my doorway when I worked at LaFace Records, and I had my head down. I didn't even realize he was standing there. And when I finally realized that, I looked up, and he said to me, he said, Sheri, you are a marketing genius. Like, you have created campaigns that have helped my artists sell millions of records. He said, but your head is always down working. And because of that, it's going to limit your career because you're going to miss so many opportunities because your head's down working. And at the time, Cornell, I didn't understand what he was saying because I'm like, dude, aren't you my boss? Like, don't you want my head down working? And it was probably 10 years before I really understood what he was saying. And what he was saying was, you know, if we could take the moment to stop working and truly understand what it means to maximize opportunities, which means you have to really look at where you're going, how you want to get there. Many times, and this has been true in my life, I literally could have made one phone call and got to where I wanted to go versus the 3, 6, 10, 15 days, 10, 18 hours I was putting in to get to the same destination. And so what I mean is when we stop working and start maximizing, when we really stop just being busy for the sake of busy and really look at and find and leverage those opportunities that we can maximize, then we put in the work towards that. And it has truly changed my life and the lives of many of my clients, just that simple reality.
That is brilliant. I love it. Well, I don't want to give away too much of the book because I want people to go and purchase. Tell us how we can get the book.
Yes, so it is on sale everywhere, February 7th. At all Barnes & Noble, all online retailers. Please definitely make sure that you go to Barnes & Noble. You can go to Amazon.com, Target.com, iTunes, Google Play. It is available on Audible. It is available on ebook. And you can also go to my website, Sheri Riley, SheriRiley, SheriRiley.com/book. Make it real simple. You can go there as well, and you can order your copy there also.
Great. Now, are there any tours set in place where our listeners can probably come meet you and get it signed and things of that nature?
Well, I'm actually working on that now. So I'm going to have a few spot dates. I'm doing one in Atlanta. I'm doing my hometown, Richmond, Kentucky. I'm going to do Louisville, Kentucky. And then we're mapping out Chicago, Miami, D.C., New York, and L.A. And those will probably run between March and April. And I definitely would love for your listeners to connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at Sheri, SheriRiley. And again, as you said, on my website at SheriRiley.com.
Perfect. So we encourage you to go check out her website and stay in tune with that to to be up to date on those tour dates for the book. Well, Sheri, I am so excited and glad that you enjoyed us. Thank you so much, and we'll be talking real soon. Well, this has been the Build on Beauty podcast, where beauty is born skin deep. I'm your host, Cornell Jermaine. Until next time, let your soul be made whole. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Build on Beauty podcast. For more information about our host, please visit cornelljermaine.com.